All right. I haven't told you what page we're on yet. The page number is always a secret until the rabbi says go, because as we've talked about before, we can't cover the entire parasha. Right? Any Torah portion has too much material for just one little study. So instead, I take a slice, at different times. And today's slice is going to be on the Kriyat Hayam, the parting of the sea, because we are in Beshallach. We are finally leaving Egypt, and we are going to get up to the sea, Yam Suf, and we need to get across. So we need to make sure we have the right mental picture. Right? We have. I'm just going to sort of draw it roughly. We've got the sea. Right? We're going to use the transliteration Yam Suf, literally the sea of reeds. Exactly which body of water this was is still debated among the scholars. The idea that it is the Red Sea is one of the most popular in people's imagination. But the Red Sea, I'm trying to see if we have a picture of the Red Sea in the room. I don't think so. The Red Sea, at the bottom of Egypt, where Egypt goes down and then it goes this way, and you have the Suez Canal. Unlikely to be all that way down, because that would be a really big southern detour, but some people say there. Other people say it was many of the intermarshlands. There were like swamps in Florida. We should be familiar with this. That were along that side, and that must one of those was what was talked about, because Yam Suf, a sea of reeds. We know swamps have lots of stuff in them. So we're not going to worry too much about exactly which piece of water it was, but what happened was that over here, this was to Israel, and that way was Egypt. And you had us, and then you had me coming down, right? Mm-hmm. So proverbial rock and a hard place. Mm-hmm. Right, we're stuck here. We want to get to Israel. What do we need to do? Cross. We need to cross, right? That is the goal. How did it happen? Because we got across, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But how did it happen? You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Right? All right. So imagine you are an Israelite, and you're on the other side, and there's some other traveler there, and he's like, "What just happened? Where'd you guys all come from? What just happened?"
The sea was parted.
The sea was parted. What does that mean? Remember, this hasn't happened before. When you say the sea parted, I can't think back to Charlton Heston. I need you to describe, what does it actually mean, the sea parted?
During the night,
right?
That kicked away the water and dried up the path.
All right, so there was a wind at night and it moved the water. So you mean the water, like all the water went this way, and there was dry all the way here? No?
In the middle.
So the wind
pushed the water to the side.
Wait, so the wind pushed the water to the sides.
Yeah. Which way was the wind blowing?
Yeah, there was a 25 points difference
in the barometer, right? It was a gale force 9. Okay, so you're saying that there was water here and water here, and the wind was blowing maybe this way, and then we could walk across.
Oh. But it doesn't make sense to me.
No.
Because when the wind blows,
mm-hmm.
I was living between Honduras and El Salvador.
Right.
And in the middle is huge river called Huascora.
Mm-hmm.
And then whenever we have the wind blowing, it's coming with the current.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it goes, so there is no way it's going to be a
it's not, the wind maybe speeds up the water.
For me, that was a miracle. That's
right.
it.
Doesn't seem to just make natural sense, or maybe Renata, you were saying maybe the wind came straight down, a giant right down, and it pushed it to the what? Tornado. Or tornado, which would be lovely for me to walk into.
Well, after you swallow it, you don't want it.
Chase the tornado. You know, people are there. You do have tornado chasers. All right. So, you know what? Maybe our memory isn't the perfect one. Maybe we should see what the Torah says, and see how the Torah describes it, and then we'll go to our commentator to see how we can make sense of what the Torah says. Because, well, we'll see. So we're going to pick up on page 402. 402. 402.
Chapter 14.
Well, chapter 14. Chapter 14, verse 10. Verse 10. Yeah, we're not going to do the Az Yashir, not going to do the Shirat Hayam, because that's a little too much poetry. We're going to do the narrative version. There's two different accounts, not different, but two accounts in the Torah. You have the plain version, the regular sort of story, and then you have the poem, the Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, that is, well, more poetry. It's lyrics. So you know, maybe not as clear as the regular prose narrative. So page 402, Beshallach, chapter 14, verse 10. Okay, good. Harry, are you still willing to volunteer?
Still here.
Okay. Well, I thought it got so warm you might have flown north. But
You got 60 degrees up there. Snow tonight.
snow, 60 degrees today, but snow tonight.
Snow tonight, that's correct. Talk about interesting weather.
All right, so I can deal with Florida's consistency then.
So let's read about some interesting weather here.
Very interesting weather. Good connection. Yes.
As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them.
All right. As I mentioned, here we are, and here comes Pharaoh's army.
Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, 'Let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians'? For it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness."
Right? Isn't that the cry of anyone who is offered the chance of freedom? Right? Lose. It's better for me to be alive and a slave than to be dead and free. That, you know, the majority of people throughout human history, that's what they agreed. Right now, you know, we know with the famous Patrick Henry, "Give me liberty or give me death." These people said, well, if that's my choice, I'll take life and slavery. And they're accusing Moses of not, look, why did you bother doing this? You've got us stuck here now. And this is kind of, I hope, also drawing a few questions in your own mind. Is this a normal thing you would expect the people to say?
They didn't ask to be saved. They cried out to God.
For
They
slave.
were crying to be saved, right?
But they've got two choices. Pharaoh's army is going to kill them, or there's this sea in front of them that they can't get away from.
Yeah, but who put them in that choice?
Moses.
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 Really?
I'm not sure.
Who? Who?
God.
God. Why are they complaining to Moses? Why aren't they talking to God? Why aren't
They
they?
cried out to God.
What's that?
It says they cried out to God.
So they cried out to the God, yes, and then they blame God, and then they blame Moses, right? And by blaming Moses, they seem to be implying that this situation is Moses's fault, and they're expecting Moses to fix it. Hold that in the back of your mind as we come back to our commentary. All right, so Moses is going to respond.
But Moses said to the people, "Have no fear. Stand by and witness the deliverance which the Lord will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will battle for you. You hold your peace."
All right, be quiet is actually a better translation than hold your peace. Hold your peace is an English euphemism for be quiet. I think the English be quiet or be silent would have been better, right? Shut up.
Yeah.
Right. Why did you bring us out here? There's not enough graves in Egypt. Shut up.
Right.
Just wait and see.
It's like, the Lord's going to take care of you.
Okay. And now God chimes in.
And God said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward. And you, lift up your rod and hold out your arm over the sea and split it, so that the Israelites may march into the sea on dry ground. And I will stiffen the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they go in after them. and I will gain glory through Pharaoh and his warriors, all his warriors, his chariots and his horsemen. Let the Egyptians know that I am Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen.
All right, so God's solution is, what's all the talking about?
Yeah.
Let them go forward, hold out your rod, which, by the way, because of that odd word order of why am I going forward before the rod is extended and the sea is split, is where we get the midrash of Nachshon, of the guy who walked into the river all the way up to his head, right? That comes from this. They were going forward before the splitting began. Yes?
Yeah, here I see something that it says, hold out your arm.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear, hold out your king.
Right, but literally it says arm. Yeah, exactly. In the pictures, it's always the staff.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to get to why in a little bit, but that's what it literally says in this passage. And then God is going to split the water. We'll go through. He will embolden. He will stiffen the resolve. We talked about this on Shabbat, about this concept of hardening the heart and stiffening the heart, stiffening the resolution, or because there's two different verbs that get used, or for kaved, for making it heavy, it's being basically make you stupid. In this case, he's going to add to the Egyptians' bravery, right? They want to chase you down. I won't let them get afraid. If they want to chase you, they'll be able to chase you even into this rather odd situation that's about to occur with the parting. And that's what's going to happen.
But it's oddly phrased as well, because God says to Moses, you hold out your arm and split the sea, and I will harden the Egyptians' hearts.
Right.
It's like Moses is actually doing the splitting, which...
Well, that's going to come back. Exactly. Who's actually splitting it?
Actually happened, yes.
Good. Verse 19.
The angel of God, who had been going ahead of the Israelite army, now moved and followed behind them. And the pillar of cloud shifted from in front of them and took up a place behind them. And it came between the army of the Egyptians and the army of Israel. Thus there was a cloud with the darkness, and it cast a spell upon the night, so that the one could not come near the other all through the night.
All right, so we had been following the pillar. Change colors here. We had been following the pillar of cloud or fire, and now it goes behind us, and that keeps us from being attacked by the Egyptians during the night. During the night?
What night?
What night?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do we need a night?
You got all these people walking. How long does it take?
Apparently, this is going to take some time. But more than just our walking, apparently the splitting is going to take time, as we're going to see from the next paragraph. Okay, so we're on we're still chapter 14, but verse 21.
Then Moses held out his arm over the sea, and the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind all that night, and turned the sea into dry ground.
Pause there, even though our translation doesn't. So apparently it took all night for the sea to split. It wasn't just like the movies.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah, right.
Apparently there was a strong wind all night, and during the whole night there was this protection between us and the Egyptian army behind us, and then in the morning we can go. So it took time.
Actually, if anybody saw the last Exodus movie, they showed it the right way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because Moses was completely lost. He didn't know what to do now, and he's watching the wind pushing the water all night.
Wait a minute. Moses was lost? He didn't know what to do?
No, he was lost in the way that it's explained here, because Hashem tells him, just lift your hand
Right.
and it's going to split.
Because you'll notice, Moses, when he's trying to calm down the people, he doesn't tell them, don't worry, God will split the sea. He just says, don't worry, God will deliver us.
Because I don't think he
How?
knows. Yeah, he doesn't know.
He doesn't seem to know how. Right? He knew about the plagues, but he doesn't seem to know about this part.
He didn't have choice.
Well, he didn't. Well, I mean, but God had choices, right?
Well,
God could have just attacked the Egyptian army. You know, a little lightning and
Right.
fire and whatever, and boom, we're done. And then you can just walk around the ocean. But
But God wants to prove to Pharaoh that God is God, not Pharaoh, because Pharaoh
He is
thinks
with
he's a
us.
God.
Absolutely.
I'm proving this to Pharaoh. And just some lightning, they say, oh, that was accidental. But this, you got to know that's some strong God making that sea part.
Split. Yeah.
okay, yeah. Renato.
Is that similar this moment in Egypt, the dark and the light? The Egyptian, that's
And the
that
other
Right, the-
side is dark, and that is the light. In the Egyptian, every Egyptian have dark, but the Israelites have light. Is similar?
No. So during the plague of darkness, you're right. During Hoshech,
Okay.
back in Egypt,
Yeah.
the ninth plague.
Yeah.
The Egyptians had darkness and we had light.
Yeah.
But here it's just regular night,
Okay.
right? So there's a dividing between us, but it's just regular night. And so we're sitting here waiting. This wind is blowing all night. And Moses is trying to keep us from panicking, because even though there's this barrier between us, we know there's an army on the other side of the barrier. And then it happens.
And the waters were split, and the Israelites went into the sea on dry ground. The waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians came in pursuit after them into the sea, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen. At the morning watch, the Lord looked down upon the Egyptian army from a pillar of fire and cloud, and threw the Egyptian army into panic. He locked the wheels of their chariots so that they moved forward with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Then the Lord said to Moses, hold out your arm over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians and upon their chariots and upon their horsemen. So Moses held his arm over the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal state, and the Egyptians fled at its approach. The Egyptians into the sea. The waters turned back and covered the chariots and the horsemen, Pharaoh's entire army that followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the Israelites had marched through the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left.
All right.
That is
Some pretty intense stuff.
Oh, yeah, that's intense.
But what does it mean? Right? The old question of, if you had a video camera there, what would you have recorded? And that's what we're going to try and unravel. Now, the main commentary that we're using here is from Luzzatto, Shadal, who was a great commentator in the 18th century. 18th century? 19th century, sorry, in the 1800s. So he was somebody who wanted to ensure that in that day of modern reason and analysis, that the Torah would still be respected and understood, and also that we would be able to see it clearly. So let's see how good of a job he did. So first, he's going to tackle that question we had of, why are the people complaining to Moses? And that's our first paragraph on the first side.
Hadn't they seen with their own eyes all the plagues that God had inflicted upon Egypt, and understood that it was not Moses who had done all this?
Right. So he's going to this question of, why are they complaining to Moses? Right? Why are they complaining? And why are they complaining to Moses? So first of all, why are they complaining? God has been doing all the plagues for like a year, and now they're worried? It's like, if God could do everything that God had done, why are you still worried? God will fix this, and like he fixed everything else. So there should be more trust. And plus, Moses, right? It was, don't they realize it was God who did everything, right?
Well, to be fair, God did all that stuff, and even the Pharaoh didn't believe it and is still chasing these people. So they need more proof, I guess, both sides.
I guess so. And maybe there's something also in their faith that needs adjustment. So let's keep going.
Abravanel said that perhaps they thought that it had been God's will merely to lighten the burden of Egypt from upon them and to release them from their labor, but not that they should leave the country.
All right, so maybe, says Abravanel, the great Spanish commentator, maybe what they believed and why they are going, weren't there enough graves? Why'd you bring us out here to die? Maybe they thought all God was going to do for them was get rid of the slavery. They would still be trapped in Egypt. They'd still, have to live there, but at least they wouldn't be slaves. And that was all of God's promise. And when Moses chose to then leave the country too, that wasn't God's plan. And that's why they're trapped. Because then, if Moses brought them out of Egypt and they weren't supposed to leave Egypt, that wasn't God's plan, then they were going to get trapped. So he's saying maybe they misunderstood what God really wanted. Maybe they thought God only wanted them to be free, but not to leave. And that's why they're angry. Not bad. But
this is unlikely, for Moses had indeed mentioned to them the matter of leaving the country. When speaking of the Passover, he had said to them, now, when the Lord will have brought you to the country of the Canaanites.
Right. So he answers the Bravanel and says, with all due respect, no, that doesn't work, because Moses gave them the instructions of Passover. And in the instructions of Passover, he talks about getting to Israel, getting to the land of Canaan. So the people knew before they did Passover that they were leaving the country. So we're back to our first question, which is, why are they so confused about what's going to happen now? They know where they're supposed to be. Why are they panicking?
Maybe it's a slave mentality.
Because they're slaves, right? That's one explanation. But in the interest of modernity, he wants to do a little other layer of psychology.
In my opinion, the correct explanation is that according to the popular belief of the times, God's priests and confidants could perform supernatural deeds by means of divine power, even without a command from God himself. For they believed that God formed an alliance with his priests, his Kohanim, who knew the methods of worshiping him, and that God could be enticed by them and would do their will. See my comment on Isaiah. Thus, it was possible for the Israelites at that time to believe that the plagues of Egypt were supernatural signs and wonders, but that nevertheless, their exodus from Egypt was not by divine will, but by the will of Moses.
All right. So Shadal says, think about how the ancients thought of their priests. They thought of the priest as having special skills at manipulating God, right? At turning the dials and pulling the levers of the universe. And because they had that special secret knowledge, they could make God do miracles, right? It's like somebody who's trained their dog, right? You train your dog, you throw the frisbee, the dog's going to get the frisbee. That's because you're a good trainer. You make the dog do what you want. In this case, you make God do what you want. And that's what the people thought. Moses was just really, really good at forcing God to do what he wanted up till this point. And so therefore, now that they're stuck, make God do another trick, right? We need more power. Do your magic. And Moses is like, you don't understand. It's not me. It's God. Which is why, if you look back, when we talked about that, when he answers in verse 13, right? Don't be afraid. Stand by and witness the deliverance of the Lord, right? Because that God will do for you against the Egyptians, right? The God will battle for you. Shut up. Be quiet. Because he's like, you still don't get it. They want to think of him as being the chief magician of the Israelites. And he's like, that's not me. God is doing all of this. And everything I do is because God controls me. God commands me, not because I control God. So I think that Shadal does a good job of understanding the mind of the people. They knew from watching the Egyptians what priests were supposed to do, right? The priests manipulate the God to make things happen the way they want. And Moses is trying to teach them it doesn't work like that. It's the other way around. Okay, but then we have the question of, well, why doesn't Moses just tell them what's going to happen? Why not just explain to them the next step like he would with the plagues? And that's his next comment.
God did not inform Moses in advance about the splitting of the Red Sea. All he had said was, I will make myself honor in Pharaoh. We saw that above. Thus, when Moses saw the Egyptians moving after them, he did not know how or by what means God would save the Israelites. So he told them to stand and to see the salvation that the Lord will work for you today, so as to encourage them to God.
All right. So Moses didn't know how this was going to work, right? He only knew what God had told him, and God hadn't said, you're going to get to the water and the water is going to split. He just said, take the people that way. And they get to the water, and Moses is like, all right, I know God's going to fix this, but I don't know how. And then Shadal introduces this idea of Moses praying. Why does he introduce the idea of praying? Because God mentions it. If you look in verse 15, the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry out to me? Now the Israelites had cried out a little bit before, but we hadn't seen Moses crying out. And so what Shadal is saying is that in between Moses' speech to all the people, and in between God talking to Moses, Moses must have said, don't be afraid, everyone. It's okay. It's okay. Please, God, please. And that's why God is saying, you don't need to pray to me. Just do this, right? This is what I'm about. Stop praying and do this. And again, it's that beautiful, you can just see poor Moses, going, it's okay, everyone. Don't worry. Don't worry. Oh my God, what are we going to do?
This is the God who's been in slavery for 400 years. And by the way, these are not exactly an educated people. They've been slaves, and the only thing they see are gods that are idols.
Right.
Here's all of a sudden he's talking about some God in the clouds that they can't see.
Right.
It's hard for them to trust.
They have the history of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and their families, but that's hundreds of years old, and they don't have Torah yet. So yeah,
400 years they've been slaves. This is the God who's going to now protect them.
Exactly. And as we saw earlier in the Exodus story, the magicians and priests of Pharaoh, they did this, right? I mean, they did stuff that looked like they were forcing their gods to do stuff. So it's natural. And it's hard for Moses to figure out how to make them look in the right direction, think the right way. Okay. But now, what about the actual parting? What about the actual split? So this is the meat of our discussion.
And that's where it says, and the Lord made the sea flow.
Exactly.
The splitting of the sea, as recounted in the Torah, was a miraculous event mixed with natural elements. For if God had not wished to make any use at all of the forces of nature, east wind formed. Okay, so this is his question. Well, he starts off with his answer, but then he's going to try and prove it, right? So he starts off with his answer, which is the splitting was miracle plus nature, and they worked together. And then he gives a little proof, and he says, well, there had to be some nature, because if God wanted it to be 100% miracle, why make a wind blow, right? Why make any natural force present in this? I mean, if God had just said, split, it could have happened in silence, right? No wind, no water, no anything. Why use the wind? And what's going on here? All right, well, he's going to go into more to make sure we understand that nature was involved. The text itself explicitly states that God made the sea flow with a strong wind. Thus, Rashbam wrote,
the other great commentator, Rashi's grandson, Rashbam,
as in the normal way of the world, is he caused the wind to dry and congeal the streams.
Right, congeal maybe it's not the best translation to make them not flow. So what Rashbam is saying, and Shadal is agreeing with him, is that looked sort of natural, right? The cause of it was, of course, the miracle of God. But in the end, it looked like, when you dry up a stream, it looked like when you dry up a stream, right? And that happens when you have a lot of wind, it can dry up the water, it can push it back a little, that happens. And that's what you would have seen if you were there. Okay, we're gonna have to come back to that.
Therefore, in order to explain how this came about, Clericus, followed by many.
So, who? Clericus. Who's Clericus? All right, so this is one of the things that makes Shadal unique. Clericus was a Christian Bible commentator from the 1700s, and Shadal read his works and tried to see what he could learn from his analysis, because this was a time when there was renewed interest in the grammar of Hebrew, both among Christian and Jewish scholars, and also a great deal of interest in historical accounts. of what do they know about this part of the world? What do you know about the archaeology? What do you know about the people who live there? What do they say this is like? This was a very useful resource for many Jews to study, because he had done a lot of that research about the history and the parts of the world and the geography and all of that. So it may seem surprising to us that Shadal is quoting a Christian researcher, but in this, they seem to agree.
Okay, so Clericus, followed by many, said that the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, that will be the Gulf of Suez at its northern end towards Suez, and Pi Hahirot, as is the tradition among the Arabs.
Right, meaning that Clericus, when doing his research, had found that the Arabs who still lived in Egypt at the time, if you asked them, where was the parting of the sea, they pointed to part of the Red Sea. Right, that was the local tradition of explaining where that had happened. Like I said, many other people now think that it happened further north in the inter swamplands, but Clericus, for his research, said it was the top of the Red Sea. Okay? Okay.
And they passed through it as its waters were turning back and receding. But when Moses stretched forth his arm over the sea, God sent a powerful wind that blew from north to south and prevented the waters from returning quickly, so that the low tide lasted many more hours than normal.
Okay, so what's his basic idea of what happened?
It was sort of a little bit natural.
It was sort of a little natural. All right, let's do a little map of what he's describing. Right, so it's not drawn to scale. All right, so basically, right, did I do one too many? Yes. Hold on a second. All right, so this is Egypt proper, right? This is Sinai, and it's going to come up, and then you're going to get that, and yeah, that's right. And then boom. Did I do that right? Hold on a second. I can never draw Israel without actually drawing the whole thing. There we go. Yeah, a little bit more like that. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, we're not here for geography class. Anyway, so this is the Red Sea, right? This is Eilat, if you've been to Israel, and this is Sinai, where we're headed. All right. This is Israel itself. Is the path that the Israelites were taking was right here, right across the tip of the Red Sea. Right? And what he said is that the normal tide would pull the water back, and then the normal tide would pull the water up. But what happened is the normal tide pulled back, and the Israelites started. And when the tide should normally come back, the wind was blowing like this to keep the waters from coming back too soon. And then once the Israelites were gone, the wind stopped and the water went back to its usual space.
I see a problem with that.
There's a lot of problems here.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's one? Give me one problem.
The first one is that it says in the Bible, Torah, Kadim, Ruach Kadim.
Okay, so the first
Eastern wind.
north, south, in the Torah, right, it says that it's east.
Yeah.
That it's an east wind. So how can it be a north-south wind if the Torah says that it's an eastern wind? But the problem is, if it were an eastern wind, how is that helping? Right? An eastern wind pushing this way, it's not going...
I think I can explain it. It depends. Ruach Kadim means not from the east to the west, but the other way, from the west towards Canaan.
So going this direction.
Yeah.
But that still isn't going to make, if you have a water, right, and you blow the wind this way, right, how much wind do you need, or that way, to make it part? So much, it's incredible. But if you blow it this way, it's much easier.
But then it creates only one water.
Okay. And so the first question, right, question number one is, what direction was the wind? And the second question is, what happened with the walls? Because it said twice there was a wall of water on the right and a wall of water on the left. So for Shadal to work, we only get one wall, and we have the wind coming from the wrong direction. Don't worry, he has thought of this, and there is an explanation. All right, so keep reading.
Because if it had been the power of the wind alone that had dried the sea, it could not be understood how people could have passed through it without being swept away by the wind.
I love the modern rationalist, right? If God was blowing a wind hard enough to make the water split all by itself without the tide helping, who can walk in that, right? Do you want to go walk in a hurricane wind? 100-mile-an-hour wind, 200-mile-an-hour wind, it's like, or no, you just go, boom. You would just be completely bowled over. So if the wind was being used to part the water and only the wind, the Israelites couldn't have even walked through the path. Okay, so that's why he says the tides were needed. But what's he going to do about the east-west question?
Clericus and his followers maintain that this wind was not literally an east wind, but rather a north wind. But because the east wind was strong and harsh in these regions, they would call any strong wind an east wind. For example, with the east wind you break the ships of Tarshish, and that's in Psalms. And then in Jericho it says, Ezekiel it says, the east wind has broken you in the heart of the seas. And in Jeremiah it says, I will scatter them as with an east wind before the enemy.
Right.
And
then Isaiah and Job, there are similar references, but I ran out of space on the room on the page. So what Clericus and Shadal is agreeing with is Ruach Kadim. It's just a metaphor, right? It means strong wind. It means super wind. It doesn't actually mean that the windsock is pointing straight east. It's a strong wind, and that's just the way they use it. And we've talked before about the Torah often uses phrases that literally mean one thing, but it's now just a euphemism, right? When we say Yad Chazakah, that God brought us out with a strong hand, does God have fingers? No, but the word hand means agency and power and activity. So we don't have to think about God with a hand. We just think of God's agency. When it says Ruach Kadim, an east wind, it doesn't mean that it's exactly pointing east. It just means it's strong like the east wind. Maybe, not bad. Again, not asking you there are other opinions. It's just nice to see his style for explaining all these features, but we still have a problem.
On the other hand, the scholar Jost in the Allgemeine Geschichte says that the splitting of the Red Sea was not at all due to the return of the sea waters in the course of nature.
Right, meaning this is not just the tides and extra wind, but instead,
but rather was caused entirely by a great and powerful storm wind, that the storm took place on the previous day and night, turning the sea into dry land, and that Moses had the Israelites cross the sea after the fury of the storm had passed, but before the waters returned to their place.
So think of it as going through during the eye of the storm, right? So you have a big storm that comes up and it pushes the waters away, and we rush through while the storm is dying down. That's why we can walk, because otherwise the wind would be too strong. But we get ahead of it before the waters come in, and the Egyptians after us, they're a little slow, they get caught in the water. So it says, that's not a bad idea. Maybe it was a strong wind. He seems to like the tide plus the wind, but a storm wind could also work, he's saying. But the thing to know, that you should remember no matter what.
In any event, there is no doubt that this phenomenon consisted of miracles mixed with natural occurrences.
Right. But you have to agree, he's arguing, that there were natural forces working to make the miracle happen. That this was not a miracle that was only just, God doing something with no natural elements. The water, the wind, the tide, the storm. Some part of the natural world was involved in how this miracle came about. And that's part of what you would have seen had you been there to witness it.
Miracles that happened when you need it.
The miracle may just be it happened when we needed it. Although I'm pretty sure I didn't bring that quote because I ran out of room. No, there's another part where there is a another scholar from the Middle Ages, from far before, who Ibn Ezra quotes, that says, Moses, he knew the wilderness. He just knew the tides, right? That's all he did. He was just clever. And Pharaoh, I mean, what did Pharaoh know about the tides? When Moses ran through, you know, he knew that how much time there was. And when Pharaoh came afterwards, he didn't know what the tide was. And boom, you know, got swept away by the ocean. He didn't know how fast it was going to come back. Ibn Ezra and Shadal reject that. They say, no. You can't just say it was 100% natural. You can't just say that it was Moses just knowing the right time. Because if you do that, then there was no miracle, there was no God. It's like me saying, you know, the sun will come up tomorrow as you know, you know, that's not a miracle, that's just knowing how the natural world works. Idea. But what Shadal is saying is that nature and miracle work together to make the Exodus. Okay, but we still have a question. Where are our walls? Right? Where are the walls? The walls of water. The most famous picture in all the movies. It's the walls of water. I don't know if you've seen Prince of Egypt, the animated version of the Exodus. Great songs, wonderful music. And when they come to this part, when they're crossing the sea, walls of water. I mean, they have the walls like 100 feet high, and you can see whales swimming behind them. I mean, it's like just, wow, that they really like the walls. But Shadal, we still have no walls. What happened to my walls?
According to Ibn Ezra, the waters froze, and then after the Israelites passed through, they melted.
All right, so Ibn Ezra wants to know, how does the water stay up without the wind still blowing? Because as we already talked about, if the wind is still strong enough to push the water back, it's going to push me over, no problem. So Ibn Ezra's idea was the water froze. Right? It was a glacier. And then after we went through, the water melted and it came crashing back down. That's one way to stop the water. Have your walls and let us through and have the water return to its natural state a little bit later. Maybe, okay. However,
the correct view is that of Gersonides and Abravanel.
And himself, right? So these are three. So with Shadal, right? Well, he's the guy saying correct. So that gives three great commentators on this side.
Were not high to the right and left. Rather, the wind moved them there and restrained them from flowing, as it is seen with sea waves that gather at the shore during a storm.
Right? The water almost gets trapped up against the edge of the shore, but it doesn't make a wall. It's just on the right side. It's pushed up against the edge.
Then was formed the path on which they crossed, like a bridge from one side to the other. And on the other side, the waters piled up, over, and flood the pathway.
All right, so what he's imagining is rather than having the path and the water, right, big walls on each side, he's saying no. You have the path, and the waters are sort of pushed up against the edges, and people walk through. But there's no walls. Okay, so what does he do with the word wall? Well, we got to get there.
So the expression "as walls" means that the waters were about them on the right and left, not literally like a wall or a heap, even though it says by way of poetic simile.
All right, so he's saying wall doesn't mean wall. Wall just means surrounding, right? Wall doesn't mean going straight up. Wall just means surrounding me, like the walls of this room surround me, that the walls of water surrounded them. There was water on both sides. And that just meant if you went this way, you'd get wet. And if you went that way, you'd get wet. It doesn't mean there was a giant sheet of water standing next to them. I know, there goes the movies. I know. So that changes the whole image, but he's going to bring a proof. Right? He's going to bring a proof from another part of the Bible.
Clericus brings proof from the expression in Nahum, than no Ammon, that was situated among the rivers, that had the waters round about her, whose rampart was the sea, and of the sea her wall.
Okay, so this is it's taken from the prophet Nahum, who is basically saying, you're not safe, thinking that you're protected, because look, Noamon, they also had protection. What was Noamon's walls? What was her castle? The water, right? Like in the old days when people would build castles, they'd often build them with water, a moat around it. The moat was its wall. Now, does that mean the moat put the water up in the air? No, but the moat did the job of a wall, right? The water did the job of a wall. And the same thing here. The water on each side kept people from coming and attacking us from the edges, and it meant there was only one path to go through. It acted like a wall. It didn't look like a wall.
That makes sense.
Make sense? Maybe? What do we think?
Yes, I think so.
Does that make it?
The new movie Exodus actually is building on that.
Is doing it that
Yeah,
side.
that side, yeah.
Does that make it a smaller miracle?
No.
Right? If the walls went up, straight up, and we're against gravity, does that make it a bigger miracle? Makes it a fancier miracle, maybe. Makes it for a better movie, I think. I mean, definitely when you see like Prince of Egypt, it's an amazing, amazing scene with the waters and giant, whales swimming by. But is that the way we have to think of it?
Yeah.
And does that make us feel the power of the miracle more?
It makes it more supernatural, if you will.
Right? And more supernatural means more godly?
To some.
But the question isn't.
That's why I brought up the concept of bringing time and place into it as well. I mean, you can have a miracle today. It's just miracles are different because, the phenomenon is natural, but the fact that it happened at a specific time and place is that which makes it miraculous.
So you mean so a miracle doesn't necessarily have to have a supernatural, a magic part. It could simply be the magic of timing.
Yeah.
The fact that this happened right at the right moment, both for us to get through and for the Egyptians to be stopped, right? Because both parts were necessary. And indeed, there is a way of reading what Shadal is suggesting here, that by saying God did orchestrate, he created this system to give us this of escape and to trap the Egyptians at precisely this moment in order to make us come through and to teach us that no matter what it looks like, that the situation can change like that, and you can find your deliverance, your salvation, your opening. And you don't have to look for magic to do it. You don't have to look at Moses to manipulate God and force him to do it. Within the natural world itself, there are miracles that are available to help us be saved. And we remind ourselves of that 3 times every day. 4 times on Shabbat, in the prayer known as Modim. And that's what the bottom paragraph is taken from the Amidah.
We thank you, for you are our God and the God of our ancestors forever. Rock of our lives, shield of our salvation, you are the one from generation to generation.
Right. That's what we're supposed to know, that the Israelites, they didn't understand so much, but we should know better.
And tell of your praises regarding our lives, which are in your hands, regarding our souls, which are entrusted to you.
And no one else, right? Our hands are not our soul is not in Moses' hands. Our lives are not in Aaron's hands, right? Our lives are only in God's hands.
Miracles which are with us every day, and regarding your wonders and favors, which are with us every moment, evening, morning, and noon.
Did you know you had a miracle for you today? Right?
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely. Right? And Modim is telling us that miracles, not just that are of regular timing, things like waking up or the sun rising or food still keeping me alive, which could just be argued are natural, but there are miracles where God is helping the timing of the world through the natural function of the world, through the natural order, to make things better within the limits of our free will and within the limits of not breaking the natural law so that we no longer can predict what the consequences of our actions would be. Those miracles are all the time. But most of the time, we don't even notice it. Most of the time we ignore it. Most of the time we say, it's just coincidence. It's just nature. Whatever. And Modim, every day, 3 times a day, we're trying to remind ourselves God is there all the time. Keep going.
You are good, for your compassion is never ending. You are compassionate, for your kindnesses never cease. Our hope has always been in you. For all these things, we bless and exalt your name, our sovereign, constantly and forever. All living things will acknowledge and thank you, and they will bless your name in truth, God, who saves and helps us. Selah. Blessed are you, Adonai. Your essence is goodness, and it is a pleasure to give thanks to you.
Amen. Right? And that's what we are supposed to take from this. When we take the Shirat Hayam, when we take the song of the sea and we put it into our prayers, either in the preliminary service or with the Micha Mocha, where we remind ourselves of God's saving power, we're not supposed to focus on the miracle style of, was it a wall, was it not a wall, was it north, was it south, was it east, was it west? That's interesting to study and to learn. Focus on is the fact that God saved us. God took us out of Egypt. God has protected us since then. God has ensured our continued survival. God has been there to help those who fight for goodness and justice, and all the things that we know from Torah are what God wants for all of his children around the world. God is always within the limits of our free will and within the limits of nature, so that we don't break the system, being there to help. And those are miracles that we have to be aware. We have to thank God for constantly, and not only thank God for the movie miracle, but for the miracle in the morning, the miracle in the afternoon, and the miracle at night.
Amen.
All right. Yes.
It's important to think that he was the maker of the wind.
Mm-hmm.
He was the maker of the water.
Yes.
He just ordered them,
Yes.
and those what the nature has to do.
The manufacturer knows how to make the products.
Yes.
And he knows how to use the products.
Exactly.
Exactly right.
Read the manual.
Read the manual. That's what the Torah is. It's the manual. All right. Thank you very much.